I don't know.
Dogras.
What is the adjective for Jammu?
For Jammu and some of the neighboring areas, Basoli, Chineni, Katra, many of those people would call themselves Dogra, but that's also an ethnic term. So there are also Gujars, a very large community of Gujars, very different to the Gujars of the valley.
Right.
In the Jammu area, Jammu, Ranbir Singhpura, those areas, Rajouri Poonch. Gujar and Pahari populations, mainly in a lot of Paharis in Rajouri and Poonch, and some angularities between certain communities. Bhadarwa, Kishtwar, Doda has another set of communities. In fact, I keep saying that the state of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, the state of Jammu and Kashmir as it was under the Dogras, as it came together during the 1830s. And I think it's very important to note that it was General Zorawar Singh, to a large extent, who brought the state together during the 1830s, about 15 years before the Treaty of Amritsar, of which Gurmeet spoke, that followed the Battle of Sobraon. Thank you for inviting me. I will ruminate a little, as was suggested, on the basis of 30 years of being in and out of Kashmir and traveling across almost the entire state. I think apart from the Zanskar Valley, I have been to every part of the state. We all know there's been a lot of violence in the last 30 years, physical violence. Under the surface of that physical violence of which we are aware, there's been other kinds of violence. Violence and shake-ups within society and the environment, which often go neglected. And which have really changed to the extent that they've become crises and gone beyond, they've become emergencies, some of those. Social norms have changed, the architecture has changed. Gurmeet spoke of some of the older architecture. In 2006, I was making a documentary film, and I tried to get visuals of some of these kind of older structures, timber structures and adobe structures. And I sent out the camera crew, and I didn't think I needed to go along. I said, just get some visuals of these kinds of structures. They had to go all the way to Patan, which is about 40 kilometers from Srinagar or more, to get those visuals, because there was no structure they could find anywhere near. The architecture has changed radically. Most people live in these vast mansions that are concrete and have led to all kinds of social as well as health issues, which we need to take on board and keep in mind while designing a sustainable future. Forests have been violated, water bodies have been violated, wildlife has been very badly affected. There was a time when militants with guns were all over Dachigam Reserve Forest, making hay with the fisheries, with the wildlife, lighting fires, all kinds of things which were unthinkable before. The one thing that I would like to emphasize is that the norms, the system has been compromised in a very, very major way. The way things are meant to be done, the rules, the regulations, the systems, have, in these last 30 years, been terribly compromised. And that has a lot to do with the way the ecology and the environment are being treated, to the extent that Jammu and Kashmir's Urban Development Authority is based on, has built its office, a large office, on wetland. I mean, it's to that extent that people have ignored the rules to the extent that even this happens. And vast government buildings have come up on those wetlands. The Achar Lake is today a concrete jungle. There is no lake. And even about 25 years ago, I remember some friends talking about going to hunt or fish in Achar. But there is no Achar Lake today. The fact is that the Dal Lake and about 7,800 crores or somewhere there, I mean, the figures will be readily available, have been spent on successive Save the Dal projects. The Dal Lake is dead today. About a year ago, I was chatting to a very senior officer, a retired, extremely senior officer, who has been directly in charge of these waterways. And I said, the Dal is dead. And he said, what do you mean it's dead? I said, the springs at the bottom of the lake are dead. So he simmered down. Yes, that is true. And that has a lot to do with the way development has taken place, even since the last 50 or 70 years. The boulevard all around the Dal Lake has actually prevented the free movement of water to the lake. And instead, by building this road all around the lake, we have prevented the natural flows, and what we have done instead is create all the, and allow all the sewerage of Srinagar, a large part of it, to go into the Dal Lake. And we keep blaming the houseboats. Actually, houseboats have come down from about 5,000 at a peak to about 900 today. But the sewerage of the city is going in there, and not only that, reclamation, and I was glad to see on Gurmeet's map that the area between the Nishad Gardens and the Shalimar Garden are still marked as wetlands. That's all concrete, mansions and roads at this point, and beyond. And over the last year or two, I have watched sort of the fill coming up in the middle of the lake, a fresh line of, you could see the mud is being placed in that. And all the way from about Nehru Park, or a little beyond Nehru Park, to the SKICC. And the SKICC itself is an island that has been, or a part of the lake that was reclaimed at a time in the 70s when already environmental consciousness should have been growing, but wasn't, quite obviously. So norms, again, accountability is such an important part of what needs to be done. Systems must be repaired. Corruption must be weeded out, because the kinds of changes that I've talked about in terms of mansions coming up in all kinds of locations is partly because of corruption. You pay off the right kind of people and you get whatever you want, wherever you want. And this is extremely dangerous in terms of also the flood. Gurmeet spoke of certain parts of the city having been flooded. The parts of the city that were flooded are exactly the parts which have been developed since the 1930s. Maharaja Hari Singh built suburbs in Wazirbagh, Rajbagh, Gogji in the 1930s. Rajbagh was to house his ministers. And he changed that idea once he was told by hydrologists that this is a floodplain. Now, Kashmir, the Kashmir Valley has had floods regularly in a 50-year cycle for centuries, for millennia, more or less a 50-year cycle. So the floods of 2014 should have been expected. They were overdue. 3 dredgers had been sent by the center to the state in the late 1950s when the last huge floods happened. Those dredgers were not functional. Some of them had been cannibalized. None of them was functional. And of course, once the floods happened, they were useless. What worries me is that since the floods, in the last 5 years, fresh dredgers have been sent, contracts have been given, cancelled, given again, all of that we won't go into. But the dredgers that are actually operating, I have seen this with my own eyes, are actually operating for the sand mafia, if I would put no finer point on it. What they're actually doing is they find a spot in the river where the sand is good and dig there very deep. And I spoke to one of India's finest hydrologists about this, and he said, but this is building the way for fresh floods, because the area around that pit in the riverbed becomes higher. What you need to do is a survey of the hydrological survey and make sure that the entire river is uniformly dredged. That's the only way to prevent a future flood. Again, this is to do with the breakdown of systems, of norms, and of checks, accountability. Lifestyles have also changed. And in various ways. From the effect on Bakarwal routes, from summer to winter, they used to take their flocks across the mountains, and those routes have been interrupted quite often. But even to the micro level and in the cities and villages of particularly the valley, the dubs of which, to which Gurmeet referred, which are a wonderful social feature of the architecture of traditional houses, particularly in the old city. These are extended balconies, very often round, semicircular, and closed, in which women and children and the people of the house would sit and interact with people passing on the road below and in nearby houses. Those have gone. New cement and concrete houses have come up. Until the 1990s, until the end of the 80s, it was almost impossible to find a Kashmiri house locked, and walls were very low. People were in and out of each other's houses all the time. By the late 1990s, high walls about 9 foot high have become standard, and they are locked. The gates are locked. Society has fragmented, unnoticed. And this also is one of the features of what needs to be addressed. Let's just go across to tourism, the potential. The ecology is so important for that. And this sort of architectural heritage of Kashmir could be also a very important part of the kinds of tourism that could be built up. Because as things stand, tourism is limited to basically 2 pockets, Gulmarg and Pahalgam. And originally, Gulmarg is not even a habitation, a traditional habitation. It was Tangmarg, a little below Gulmarg. That is a village. Pahalgam is a village. So tourism has only actually benefited locals in these 2 pockets. A lot of infrastructure has been built in a place like Manasbal, a beautiful area with Mughal ruins and all kinds of other scenic and architectural marvels that are well worth visiting, but nobody goes. Nobody. Everybody goes only to Gulmarg or Pahalgam. Again, we neglect the role of social structures, caste, in the way in which tourism takes place. The boatman community is a limited social group. And some families, again, the oligarchy that has had power and influence to some extent, have patronized some families, and they have built hotels and other infrastructure. Until a very short while ago, about a decade ago maybe, there was not even a restaurant worth the name for a tourist in the second largest city of the valley, Anantnag. Even today, there's hardly anything in Sopore or Baramulla, the 4th and 3rd largest cities. And even in Srinagar, nobody goes, the tourism is isolated from the old city, which has so many of these marvels, some of which we saw, and is limited to one belt along the Dal Lake and the nearby areas. Okay. And my point is that climate change will multiply many of the ill effects of the kinds of architecture we are seeing, the kinds of effects on wildlife, on forestry, and the water bodies. Some predictions on some models predict about 5% in temperature increase in the mountains. We're worried in the plains about 1.5 or 2%, 2 degrees centigrade increase in population. In the mountains, some models talk about the possibility of a 5-degree centigrade increase in temperature. Now, as I said, tourism is limited to the kinds of, socially, and geographically. agriculture has decreased in salience in these last 30 years. The rice crop used to be the main produce for the mass of people in the valley. That has shrunk hugely. And horticulture has taken its place to a large extent, but those orchards require less labor, much less. And most of the labor now is done by people from other states. So plumbers, electricians, carpenters, day labor, and barbers are all from other states, almost entirely. The Kashmiri youth, therefore, is looking, there is no agriculture worth the name. Tourism and handicrafts are falling off in terms of youth not being from those traditional handicrafts families, not being interested in taking up the craft, generally. And this is, of course, a universal phenomenon. But it is something that needs to be taken on board while planning the future in Kashmir. Employment, therefore, what people look for, young Kashmiris, is generally white-collar jobs, and preferably in government. Now, government is already over-employed vastly, and the overemployment leads to a lot of sloth, inefficiency, corruption, extortion, and nepotism, and the anger that results from that nepotism. So, white-collar private sector employment has to be discovered. And some measures need to be taken to control the spread of construction, particularly in fragile environmental areas. My take is that construction is actually today the Kashmir Valley's biggest industry. It's not agriculture, it's not horticulture, it's not handicrafts, it's not tourism. It's construction, and vast amounts of construction has taken place. And more than a dozen cement factories have come up in Crew, very close to where the saffron fields are. And many of those saffron fields are being converted into colonies of people moving out of Srinagar and building huge mansions there. There is no control, and there is a large mulberry farm very close to that in that corner of Pulwama district. And nobody seems interested in the consequences of all of this on the economy. And there's so much potential. So much can be done. We've heard about the bees, the honey. Extremely good quality honey is being produced by some. Lavender or other kinds of floriculture. There's huge potential there. But what people find, and some of my friends who've been trying to make a living from these new businesses, find that they come up against a brick wall as far as the bureaucracy is concerned, as far as the government systems that are meant to help them are concerned. And from civil society, there's just no encouragement for it. So, whereas these are huge challenges, this is also a tremendous opportunity. You know, the 2002 industrial policy was a dream document. It promised n number of incentives from the central government and the state government. But the very few, and now of course it's been cancelled because it clearly failed, manifestly failed. And the reason was, at least in the market, apart from Samba near Jammu, where the industrial zone has been a success, but that too qualified success. In the valley, it was largely utilized by the oligarchy and their those that they patronized. This is an opportunity to get beyond all of that, and I hope we will. Thank you very much.
Thank you.